Welcome, Jazz, to Creative to Creative.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about why we have an IT and security person on a creative podcast. Tell us a bit about the value that you see you can bring to the creative industry.
Yeah, great question. I think it's funny, people still think of cybersecurity quite often as this really isolated and siloed compartment of information technology broadly. I think when we actually think about what cybersecurity is and should be, it's really a part of everybody's individual daily lives and also therefore a part of every organization. Doesn't matter what industry you're working in, and it doesn't matter if you're working at all, cybersecurity needs to be something that is a consideration and is at the forefront of decision making. When companies set business objectives, which most will do quarterly, cybersecurity isn't always at the table there, and it really is something that we need to bring into those conversations, and security ultimately is one of the biggest business objectives because without it, everything else is at jeopardy and at risk. Particularly in the creative industry, you've got great access to platforms and tools, and often clients' platforms and tools as well. So you've got a huge risk vector there and an amount of avenues to cover. You also generally have great access to really juicy and really interesting information and data. So for creative industries, just as much as any other, cybersecurity needs to be front of mind.
So I think the common trend in, small to medium businesses, cybersecurity and IT infrastructure is probably kind of like the last thing on their list. It's kind of like that extra expense that they're just like, that can be tomorrow's problem, or it's just too much money, or there's a huge barrier to entry because they have to bring in IT service suppliers or something. So where do you see that potential area where someone is like, I need to bring in an IT service support earlier on rather than later?
Yeah, and look, I think that's a huge problem that our industry faces and has to find more innovative ways to overcome, because I think for a long time, for whatever reason, cybersecurity has been built up as this big, complicated, really difficult, really technical, niche set of skills that only a very, very few number of people have. While that's true that there are some very niche areas and there are some really, really cool tech stuff so that some really cool people are doing, the vast majority in the overall concept of cybersecurity is not that at all. But for as long as we continue to perpetuate this narrative and really, boost ourselves up, and I kind of liken it to that chicken kind of doing its preening and going, oh, look how important, how exciting I am, and look how cool my job is, the further we distance ourselves from the everyday person or the everyday business. And, that's absolutely not what we need to be doing, because those bare bones, basic root fundamentals are something that everybody can do. And in terms of barrier to entry, most of them are no cost, to be honest. When you really look at what does a small or medium business or an individual need to be doing, we are talking the most basic things. And a lot of it's even just having the conversation. So many teams and business owners and leadership, I think, are not even having the conversation for fear of those things you just mentioned, the barriers to entry being too high. And I think also for many, it's not knowing what to talk about or how to start that conversation at all.
Do you feel like things get a little bit more out of control as you get bigger as a business? Because you've obviously got more access points, more, visibility for someone who obviously stumbles upon your business. Like, do you think that is a determining risk where people think, I'm not that big, I'm not advertising, I'm not front of mind, people aren't going to care? Is that the sort of thing that you normally battle day to day with that small business?
And I think both things are true. Of course, the more you grow, the more you scale, you do open up your risk points, as you just mentioned. And, if you think about it in any other context, if you have this amazing, huge, beautiful, big house with all of these really expensive sport cars out the front, of course, that looks really attractive and you're probably going to see a lot more people stop and look and take notice. But all the same, we know that traditional type of crime, like a house burglary, happens regardless of what your house looks like. So yes, while as you grow, those challenges and complexities change and differ, even when you're before that stage, you're no less attractive as a target. And in fact, when you think about cybercrime, I often encourage people to really take a step back and think about, who's perpetrating it and why. And the vast majority is perpetrated for financial gain. So these are people who are acting to make money. And as any of us in business know, you want to have the best return on investment. So the least amount of money you can spend to make that money back, and therefore the least sophisticated that business and their systems are, and the least amount of energy and focus and resource they've put into cybersecurity controls, the easier they are as a target. So you'll get better ROI on it.
I think a lot of people think cybersecurity and all the software and platforms are kind of like they don't need them, or potentially it's just an expense they have to spend. Is there a potential opportunity in the cyber world about positioning it as more of a reason that someone will pick you as maybe a service provider or a consultant or a contractor? So I'm thinking, is there space for, especially whether it's the creative field or otherwise, where we're obviously promoting the fact that we are, an IP rated, or we are, a cybersecurity somewhat rated professional where your data is safe with us when you use us.
I see what you're saying. Absolutely. I mean, I think like anything, where we're in an environment that has been somewhat slow to regulate anything in terms of cybersecurity controls. We just have our first Cybersecurity Act for Australia as of the end of last year. So, it's taken a long time for us to get there. We obviously saw the launch and the inception of the Essential 8, which is a really great starting point. But, we're still maturing as well as a nation in our cybersecurity maturity. So in that, I think for any business who wants to be ahead of the curve and wants to take those actions to stand out, now is a really good time to do it, particularly as the conversation increases. We have our Australian cybersecurity strategy now as well. So as more and more businesses and individuals become aware of that, I think that narrative is really changing, and we've already seen that as well, that there is that understanding from business and understanding from corporate that cybersecurity needs to be talked about, and it's turned into that. It's not if, it's when an incident will occur. So yeah, the more that happens, the more that people will be recognised for their ability to demonstrate their cybersecurity maturity. I think we've already seen in a lot of tender applications for private and government that there are questions about cybersecurity maturity and where you sit. More and more industries are starting to think about their supply chain as well. So, it doesn't matter how good your organisation is in their maturity, if everybody that you're working with is at bar zero, you've greatly increased your risk. So, yeah, definitely there's a good opportunity there.
Can you talk a little bit more about the Essential 8? I'm assuming not everyone knows about that one, but it's obviously a mandatory that government suppliers are bringing in for, if you're tendering for any government contract, you will need to abide by those Essential 8 self-agenda ticks. Can you tell us a bit about how that might impact businesses?
Yeah, so ASD set up the Australian Cybersecurity Centre some time ago now, and it's a really wonderful resource that we have. And what they do is collect reports of incidents. They also put out a lot of great information about how individuals and organisations can better protect themselves. And one really revolutionary thing and wonderful thing that was put out is this Essential 8 framework, which is a set of 8 mitigating strategies in which all businesses should be following to bring their cybersecurity maturity up to a starting point and a reasonable standard. And I smile and laugh because, of course, there's a lot of people that say that doesn't go far enough, and there's a lot of people in the small to medium and particularly small business space that go, well, that's way too much. How could I ever do all that? I don't even know what those words mean. And I think that's where there's probably still a disconnect there. There are a few other frameworks in development and some already published, which perhaps have a more user-friendly approach and ability for small businesses to adapt. And then there are other frameworks which are even more comprehensive. So I think at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what framework it is. It's that businesses can look toward them to start thinking about what they need to do and what it is on that journey.
On that, what do you think are the top 3 things you would suggest any small to medium business to do to help improve, I guess, their business security straight away, like the top 3 things?
Yeah, the first one is definitely starting with a conversation and bringing everybody within the team into that conversation. And during that time, discussing, why does cybersecurity actually matter to us? Because I guarantee that most people within that business and most people within that team still don't really understand what it means and why their organization would be a target. So, really looking at what data do we hold and what do we do with that data and what are our policies on it? And then why is it attractive and why is it valuable? I think also really having a conversation, understanding why is cybersecurity so rife and really understanding that financial, commercial business model that it is. That's a really great starting point. And also really making sure that employees understand they are make or break when it comes to your cybersecurity strategy. You can have the best technical controls in the world. And as we see from some of these big cybersecurity incidents over the past few years, it's generally human error where we see these shortcomings. So yeah, that's definitely number 1. Number 2 and 3 are super, super simple. And again, no cost, low barrier to entry. But we still see that the last ACSC report still puts password-related cybersecurity incidents at something like 64%. So, that's 64% of breaches that probably shouldn't happen. So if we could have that conversation around passwords, and I know that's a conversation we've, had and done to death, but obviously we're not having it in the right way because we still know that people are reusing passwords across multiple sites. And we still know that people are still using. If you look at the top 20 passwords each year, like password 123 is still making the list every year, right? So
excellent.
Obviously, yeah, it is really excellent. And, when I do these workshops with businesses, it is not uncommon for me to put that list on the screen and to have a few people like sink down and go, oh, that's my password, right? But it's so common. Particularly when you start to look at OT networks as well, so operational technology. That's another, big issue where we start to see passwords not being changed from default, which, again, opens the same can of worms there. So, passwords, another really good one. Make sure that everyone understands what they need to be, how to store them as well, how to share them properly too, if that's something that needs to be done across an organisation. I think that's probably particularly relevant in creative industries, particularly looking at online platforms, tools. So that's a really good one. And the third one, again, no cost, no barrier to entry, is making sure that you have multi-factor authentication on everything. Like, it's incredible that I'm still saying that, but I know that so many businesses still don't have it and so many individuals still don't have it. I have a love and a real interest for content creation in that space, and I still do a bit in that space. And, I can't tell you the number of peers in that industry that have lost access to their accounts because they've just had weak and insecure passwords and not had multi-factor authentication. And for those people, that was devastating. They've built up that platform and it had become a huge source of business and revenue and also trust for them. And it's lost overnight just from something as simple as that. So, yeah, it's worth the extra 2 seconds it takes to get a code and approve it.
I feel like we did 2-factor authentication maybe like a year and a bit ago. And obviously we're not a huge team, but that was still such a painful experience implementing that and getting everyone's phones involved and getting all the all the apps, and whether they, I don't know, like I think we use Google on some and Authenticator apps on others. Like, it was a rigmarole. I feel sorry for the large organizations with like tens of thousands of employees doing that.
Yeah, and look, there are definitely, when you start to talk at enterprise level, there's different ways that you can manage that access control. But for smaller organizations that are using app-based authentication, I empathize and I do agree. I see that it can be a big change, particularly if you're starting from zero and you've not done anything yet. And the way that I encourage businesses in that space, if that is the barrier and you're not going to start that project because it seems so overwhelming, then just start with one thing and just, even if it's every week you're doing one application, whatever it is, it's a lot better than doing nothing. So yeah, I think people still have that sort of all or nothing approach when it comes to security, but I think we really need to manage that with business operational demands, but also, bringing people and by that I mean employees and teams along that journey. Like, if their first introduction to cybersecurity is, hi, there's 50 things that are going to be changed here over the next week. Like, good luck doing a job, good luck getting access to anything. That's not a way to bring somebody on board with a new concept or with a concept that they're already unfamiliar or perhaps a bit fearful about. So, yeah, slow and steady wins the race.
So tell us a little bit about your debut into the creative field. So you're running your own podcast now. Tell us a bit about why you might have spotted that as an opportunity, whether in your field or otherwise, and tell us a bit about your experience being a bit more creative with what you do.
I mean, I was that kid selling lemonade on the side of the road, and then I realised in winter no one wanted to buy lemonade, so I started painting rocks from the gardens and sticking googly eyes on them, calling them rock pets. Somebody told me the other day that rock pets are having a resurgence on TikTok, and I was like, oh my gosh, someone's stolen 7-year-old me's idea. If only I'd trademarked it. So I've always been that person that was looking for creative ways to do things. When social media came out, I remember the conversation vividly when the first person in my friendship group downloaded Instagram, and I was like, who in their right mind would want to share photos on the internet? Like, what a crazy idea.
You must have missed the MySpace boat.
Well, as I was saying that, I was really into Tumblr though as a teenager, so I don't know what happened with Instagram, but I was pretty opposed to it for a good few weeks there. But that quickly changed after downloading that platform, and I really wholeheartedly fell in love with that idea of being able to creatively express yourself. But I also really loved that idea of being able to bring productization into that. And there was something for me that really spoke between the joy that I got in creating content there was that really exciting time in that journey of Instagram where people had gone from just sharing photos about their life to suddenly going, how can I work a product into this story, and how can I still remain authentic and still build that connection with my audience while also productizing this? So for me, that was such an exciting time in the social media space. And I, did that for a number of years and I did quite a lot of it for a long time. And it's something that I hope I'll be 85 and still creating reels in front of a cafe. Like, for me, that's such a passion. So yeah, throughout my life, I've always looked for creative pursuits. Speaking about the podcasts, I have two, and they're both ideas that I've sat on for a long time and I never wanted to be somebody that got into it because, I just wanted to have a podcast. I wanted to make sure that there was a real purpose behind doing it because, I've really always believed, and I've always thought this with the content that I've created. If there's not a purpose and if there's not a story behind it, it is just another piece of content. And I think you see that a lot in the work that you do. There's got to be that passion and purpose behind it to make sure you tell that story, but also continue to build that trust of the audience. So, the Think Cyber podcast really came about, you think back to sort of the late 90s and early 2000s, and we had some really, really great public health campaigns. Like, I'm thinking Sid the Seagull from Slip Slop Slap and that giant watermelon.
Or Fun Ways to Die.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Also, like, you wouldn't steal a car at the movies. That was that one. Yeah, my brother and I still, we'll do that jingle together, which is somewhat embarrassing when you think about it. But and I just came to thought they are public health campaigns that have stuck in my mind all these years later, right? And then I think about cybersecurity and how, we're still having the same conversations. We're still talking about multi-factor authentication. We're still talking about don't use password 123.
So it needs a jingle, you reckon?
Right. Well,
oh, wow. Okay.
Maybe not Sid the Seagull, but I think we need something, right? Because obviously what we're doing isn't working. ACSC's just published their last year, 2023-2024 report, and, we're still seeing increases in the amount of money lost and the amount of reports made. So, for small businesses, that's near $50,000 per incident. So
isn't the stat something like 90% of businesses go under within 3 years after being hacked or something? Crazy.
I haven't heard that one, but I'd absolutely believe it. I mean, when you think about that, I think it's $49,600. So for a small business, I don't know many small businesses that would withstand that sort of loss, particularly when you consider they might be, in year 1 or year 3 or year 5. It's not a lot of time to have built up that sort of reserve. So, yeah, I just think we need to start thinking differently about how we try and engage individuals and businesses. So the Think Cyber podcast was really around that concept of, I think we need to bring it back to a storytelling approach. And I think people love listening, and when I say people, I really mean myself, love listening to like true crime, love the serial killer documentaries. Like, we're fascinated by that idea of crime and how it happens right under our noses. And when that is told in a dramatized and interesting and compelling and storytelling approach, we are hooked on that.
So are you saying your podcast is the true crime of cyber? Are we thinking... I'm going to tune in and I'm going to hear this story from, two people who just, been hacked and their password just happened to be 123 or something. Is that
spot on? Yeah, spot on.
I think your podcast.
Absolutely. I think we spent a lot of time talking about the technical attack and how it happened and whose fault it was. And I don't think we spent enough time talking about the story and what that person was doing that way and that day and why they clicked on what they shouldn't have clicked on or why that happened. So we've got some, incredible guests. Somebody who was catfished over a number of years. Speaking with an organisation who actually works with victims of human trafficking and talking about how now cybercrime has a huge part to play in that. And speaking to people that have lost access to their online business platforms and what that actually meant to them. So, yeah, absolutely. True crime, it is a true crime and it happens every single day right under our noses. And I think until we can talk about that more in society and bring those conversations to the dinner table and outside of, a boardroom or a work environment, I think that is so greatly going to help with what we do. So,
do you think there's any resources out there to help determine your risk portfolio? Like, what sort of data are you holding on to? Like, how much is that worth to someone? Or how, I guess, what do you do for work? Like, is there some sort of list you can go through to be like, how much of a target
what's your sort of risk? Yeah, it's a great question. ACSC, again, has so many resources and a lot of sort of interactive, almost workshop-based guides. So we could probably put a link to that in your show notes so that people can have a play around. There are a few like simulation type exercises as well. So I think that would be a really good place to start. But I mean, just broadly, like if you hold customer data and it has people's names, demographic information, usage behavior information, that is valuable data. So I think people often think, but we don't have medical records or, we're not, it's not secret information. It's just, what they're buying or what they're doing. But it doesn't matter, if you think about it from an individual level, sure, like I don't really care what Jasmin did today, but I care what Jasmin and every other woman of her same demographic profile did today.
Is that in relation to like pixel data, or are you talking about more organizational data like emails and like?
Honestly, completely broadly, any amount of data in which provides that information on an individual or on their usage behavior is valuable. Again, when we talk about, the types of cybercrime perpetrated and the reasons for which it's done, generally for financial gain, and the more information you can have, the more informed you can start making your campaigns and the way that you work to attack people. So yeah, it's all incredibly valuable.
So if you were new to cyber and the security space and you had some money to invest in it, what would be the first thing you would suggest for a business to look at spending their money on?
I mean, the first thing I would do would not cost money. The first thing I would do are those things I mentioned before, have the conversation with your team, work out what that risk appetite or risk profile is, work out what that maturity level is, go and update all your passwords, go and put multi-factor authentication on everything, and actually really do an audit of what data do you have and why do you have it, and do you still need to have it? If you've got data, and I think this is a great conversation for the creative industry and particularly marketing industry, right? Because, for them, I think you'll have marketing teams being like, we need to hold every piece for as long as possible.
It's the laughable fact that when you used to go to get a beer during COVID, you had to put your name, address, and email and, phone number in just to order a beer.
Yeah.
It's just like, why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Yeah, we could.
What are they doing with that?
We could have a whole nother conversation on that, but we won't. But yes, so there really does need to be a conversation about the risk of holding so much data and the risk of holding such aged data as well. So these are all conversations you can start having within your small teams without it paying a cent to anybody. And then I think once you have a bit of an idea of where you're at and, you know, what kind of data your company has, what kind of tools and platforms you use, you know, a platform audit and a tool audit is another really good thing to do, because you might find out that, you know, Ben, the intern who was here for 2 weeks, had signed up to 20 different platforms and you never use them and you don't need them and you've got no idea what access they have. You can just go ahead and remove those accounts. So yeah, that's a really good place to start. Then I think when organizations are ready to take the next step, it's probably about finding the right provider to work with. And, you know, I really encourage people to have a few conversations and actually see whose style and ethos and way of working resonates with you. In Adelaide, we are so blessed to have so many incredible cybersecurity companies. Truly, I really do think we have some of the best talent right here in SA in this space. So, you know, I think speaking broadly, most of the ones you go with will give you a great outcome. So, you know, I think Adelaideans are really lucky that they can be quite selective in finding the provider that really gets them and gets their organisation. And then you can start working through to really understand on a broader level, you know, what is your risk and what are the next steps in terms of closing those gaps.
Obviously, you're an Adelaidean. Are you looking to work with other Adelaidean companies in this space? And do you have any specialties, for instance? Or I'd also love to find out, are there any industries you think are in dire need of support that might be sort of like the left out ones of the world?
It's such a great question, actually. Are there any industries in dire need of support? I feel like every time I have an industry in mind, I then speak to somebody from another industry and they tell me about the things going on in their space. And you go, oh gosh, I had no idea it was going on that way. And I think for that reason, it is so important to keep having the conversations more broadly than just perhaps the industries with which you do the most work or the industries with which you think have the most need. I think any industries that have not had a great deal of regulation, so for example, financial services and the medical industry, probably have had a little bit of a faster uptake or some more sort of compliance and regulatory requirements. So for that reason, they may be slightly further ahead in their maturity. That's certainly not always the case, but maybe. So I think when you look at the industries outside of that, particularly when you look at small business who are not bound by the Privacy Act, there probably are, you know, a honeypot. People often describe Australia as a honeypot for cybercrime, and you know, that generally is sitting a jar of open honey on a table and seeing these bees swarm. And that is because we have a whole heap of industries that, haven't uptook a lot yet.
I have heard that Australia is very much behind the times with cybersecurity compared to the rest of the world. And in my mind, you've already mentioned marketing is probably one of those unsung industries that need help, because, you know, we do collect data, right? And then in my mind, I'm also thinking gyms, like gyms of all people. They're obviously collecting data that could be very much related to healthcare and you know, personal data. So those are two that come to my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I believe gyms are included within the scope of allied health under the Privacy Act, which probably a lot don't know. I'm fairly confident gyms do come into that. Most complementary health services do. But, you know, that's another really good point. Like, so many organisations just don't know what regulations they're bound by when it comes to cybersecurity or what they may need to do. Another good point, a lot of organisations have recently got cybersecurity insurance, and for many of those insurance providers, there's probably a tick box going, you know, do you meet some sort of basic maturity when it comes to your cybersecurity? A lot of companies tick yes, having not done anything and having not really known what that question even means. So there's still a lot of opportunity there for increased education and knowledge for those businesses.
I have noticed the cybersecurity insurance requirement on some tenders that we've looked at recently. It's just sort of snuck in there in the last 6 months or so.
Yeah,
I think it's going to become more of a thing, I imagine.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think it's like anything. You wouldn't have a car and not insure it. You know, you wouldn't have a house and not, you're smiling. You're not driving around in an uninsured car.
You wouldn't steal a car.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
You wouldn't not insure a car.
Exactly. See, I'm telling you, there's something in it. Sid the Seagull on a car. So I think we'll see that more and more. And I think insurance certainly has its place in support of recovery from incident. It's not the be all and end all, and it's not going to prevent an incident, but certainly, you know, should an incident occur, it's there to help recover.
Is there anything else you think you might want to add to the listeners out there?
Great question.
Slap.
Give your
podcast a plug.
Yeah, thanks so much. They're both launching mid next month, so I would absolutely love your feedback on Think Cyber, which is CYBR, and Confessions of a Boss, which looks at conversations with leading women in a whole range of different fields and really redefining what it means to be a boss. So yeah, I would love your feedback and really interested to hear who you'd like to have us on. And particularly in terms of Think Cyber, I really have this vision for it being incredibly impactful in the way that we talk about cybersecurity and think about cybersecurity. And when I look at this first lineup of guests, I think they give such a holistic overview to what, cybercrime actually is and what the impact of that actually is. But I would love to know, who else do you want to hear from? What other stories would be impactful? Because we need to do something differently, and we need to rapidly upscale our adoption of cybersecurity in Australia. So if this is one small part of that, I'll be really happy.
Do you think that the government and maybe even the ATO could do a better job educating business owners before they even start their business, or at the moment they start their business? Like, in my mind, it's obviously a larger educational piece, but when you start a business, you just go online, fill out a form, pay a small amount of money, and off you go. Like, there is no education around what you need to do. There's literally no preemptive education, even around tax. Like, it's a bit of a joke. It's just like you start and then you find out things along the way, right? It's not really a set in stone manual to be like, here's how to start your business, here's how to make sure it's cybersecurity safe right from the get-go.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I've had this conversation with somebody who's not from Australia, and they couldn't believe that that's how you start a business here, because where they were from, there was like a course and a process, and you kind of learned all these things. And they were like, what do you mean you just get it and run wild? Like, how are you supposed to learn all of that? So yeah, I think right across the board, from tax, compliance, HR, work health and safety, all of these things are really important skills for any business owner to learn. And I think when you speak with a lot of small business in Australia, they'll tell you the story was, oh, well, we made this mistake and then we fumbled this. And, and that's a way of learning too. But I definitely think having those resources available from the get-go would be hugely impactful. I think even when you register a business, if you were directed to the ACSC, that would be a great start. There are many wonderful programs, but two particularly great programs at the moment are the Women in Business Foundation and the Digital Solutions programs, both of which provide access for small businesses to have a one-on-one mentor in a key area. So, cybersecurity is one of them, accounting is one of them, marketing and PR are other areas, and the list goes on. But the whole idea of those programs is those small business pay a really, really nominal fee to access that, and the rest is subsidized by the program. So even things like that, like most businesses that I talk to through that program, they didn't know about it, and they only stumbled upon it for some, friend of a friend or something like that. But I think if every business knew about those two programs, it would give them a huge step in the right direction in one or many of those key areas.
I'd also love to give a bit of a plug to CUSP as well in Adelaide. So they've done a really good job with something similar where it's a subsidised cybersecurity course. One last very challenging question. So I know I've briefly touched on this before, but in my mind, I feel like in this cybersecurity space and making your organisation obviously somewhat secure and applicable for certain government industries, Microsoft is the one and only sort of tool that they actually approve in that space. What are your thoughts around this? And is that something that businesses should just assume to adopt, for instance, early on rather than later on? Is this something that do you think will be challenged eventually, or do you think that Microsoft just has that space wrapped up and it's not going anywhere?
It's a really good question. I never advocate for concentration of anything to a sole platform. I don't think it's good business. I don't think it's good from a security perspective to have one point of failure for every business across the entire world. So I'll never advocate for concentration to one individual business entity. It doesn't align with my ethos in a personal or a security sense. My Microsoft's capability is great, but there are also a lot of other tools and platforms that support that. When you talk about, I know conversations that you and I have had have really been looking at some enterprise level type of security environments, and that is a lot bigger than just that Microsoft space. I think for businesses who are making the decision on what tools and what platforms to use across the board, not just looking at your infrastructure, I think the conversation really needs to be, what are our objectives and what are our goals, and what does our business stand for and need, and does this application meet those? From a security perspective, who owns that application? Where is the data hosted? Who is it shared with? What third-party access rights have I provided by using that application?
In the creative space, we obviously use a lot of plugins. For apps like Adobe and similar.
Yeah. And
most of those, unfortunately, require networks access. And, at that point, you really can't control what it's doing. It's a plugin that's required. It's kind of sucks. So I imagine most of the Adobe tools are not included in cybersecurity safe practices either, unless you clamp them down to some extent.
Yeah, and see, the point is too, and I think this is where it becomes really helpful to speak with somebody who has a pragmatic approach to security, because I'm sure there are a lot of people that go, never use it. It's not, you can't ever use it. But that's when we get into that narrative of businesses being like, cool, well, I'm not going to do cybersecurity because they're saying that I can't use Adobe, and that's my entire job. So I think, the conversation needs to be, here are the risks with what that's doing. How do we isolate those risks from the rest of your network, from the rest of your client data? So I think, the conversation much more needs to be not what not to use. It's, what are the risks of using it? And if it is business critical and there are no other alternatives, like, I'm not ever going to say to a creative, don't use Adobe. Like, that's wild. So it becomes, how do you use that in the most secure manner, and how do you mitigate the risk from everything else? At the end of the day, like, cybersecurity is not yes or no tick box. Are we secure? It's, have we mitigated this risk as best as we could? For most business applications, that risk can be mitigated.
Well, thank you very much for being on the show. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, it was wonderful, and you're a very good interviewer.
I look forward to hearing your podcast soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks for listening to the Creative to Creative podcast. Tune in next time for some more inspiring discussions with leading creatives. And check us out on YouTube, where you can see shorts and bonus material from previous and upcoming guests. This podcast brought to you by Motion by Design.